The mirror wasn't broken. It was breathing. That's how it felt the moment I opened the DNA results. For 57 years I believed I knew where I came from, who I belonged to. And then, with one click, the blood inside me changed its name. The page on the screen was pale. Too pale. My hands hovered above it, trembling, as if touching those words could change their meaning. Numbers, percentages, regions, and a single name that didn't belong there. Before I go on, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Every place carries its own ghosts. Write it in the comments. I read every echo. My name is Clara Whitmore, and I'm 57 years old. I never planned to tell this story. Not out loud, not to anyone. But silence has a way of echoing through generations. And tonight, I think it's time mine ends. I had ordered the kit out of curiosity, nothing more. It was one of those promotions that appeared before Christmas. Know your roots. Find your ancestors. My daughter had laughed, saying it was perfect for me. The family archivist. I had imagined maps, regions, maybe a distant cousin in Ireland. Not this. The small glass vial had felt like a joke. Spit, seal, send. I hadn't realized that inside that plastic tube was a key. One that would open a door no one had dared to touch in 50 years. When the email arrived, I was baking cinnamon, apples. The scent filled the house the way my mother's perfume once did. Faint, sweet, and slightly haunting. It was December, the first winter without her. Her chair was still by the window, untouched since the funeral. I wiped the flour from my hands and clicked. The screen pulsed once. Then a new name appeared, highlighted, glowing faintly as if the monitor itself hesitated. Possible parent, child match. And it wasn't my father's. At first I laughed. Glitches happen, right? I refreshed the page. Then again. The name remained. A stranger. Male. Mid-80s. Living in Massachusetts. I leaned closer to the screen. His last name. Unfamiliar. But the first, Samuel, echoed somewhere deep, like a melody I had forgotten how to hum. The house was silent, but my pulse was not. It thundered in my ears until every sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, disappeared into it. I printed the report, though I didn't know why. The paper came out warm, the ink still damp. I touched the name with my fingertip, leaving a smudge. For a moment, it felt like touching skin. That night sleep refused me. I sat by the window, watching the streetlight quiver on the snow. Somewhere, a dog barked, once, twice. And then the world folded into stillness. My reflection in the glass looked older than usual, like the years had suddenly remembered me. I thought of my mother, Evelyn, always composed, always neat. Her words measured like silverware, polished before use. Even at the end, when her breath was thin and her voice almost gone, she chose silence over confession. She had taken something with her. I knew it. A tension that never left her shoulders, a gaze that sometimes wandered too long into old photographs. And now I had found the shape of that silence. It had a name. Samuel. The next morning, I drove to her house. My house now, technically, but it still smelled like her. Lavender and starch and the faint dust of the years. The key turned reluctantly in the lock, as if the door needed time to remember me. Inside, the air was cool, heavy with the absence of breath. I hadn't touched much since the funeral. The curtains were still drawn halfway. The sunlight slipped through in thin blades, cutting across the floor. Every corner held the echo of her orderliness. Except the attic. I had never liked that attic. When I was a child, she forbade me to go there. Too much dust, she'd say, which in her language meant too many memories. But that morning, I felt a pull. Not curiosity exactly, but inevitability. The ladder creaked beneath my weight. Each step released a sigh of wood and air, as if the house itself protested. When I reached the top, light spilled through a narrow window, catching the dust in golden suspension. Boxes lined the walls, neat, labeled, untouched. One of them, however, was different. Plain brown, no label, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The ribbon undid too easily. Inside letters, dozens, all addressed to her, and each one signed, Samuel. I sat on the floor, knees drawn close, the box between them. The first letter was dated 1954. The ink had bled slightly, like tears dried too late. My dearest Evelyn, I've kept every promise except one. The one that asked me to forget you. The handwriting was careful, almost shy. I read until the words blurred. The air in the attic grew warmer, denser, like time had folded in on itself. She had loved him. That much was undeniable. But the letters didn't end there. There were newer ones, decades newer, written, but never sent. The last was dated only a year before her death. Clara still thinks she's his. I pray she never learns otherwise. My breath caught. For a second I couldn't move. The paper trembled in my hands like a living thing. Outside, wind pressed against the window pane, and the light flickered, dimmed, returned, as if even the day hesitated to see this truth. I don't remember how long I sat there. Minutes, hours, maybe lifetimes. When I finally stood, the box felt heavier, as though it carried her heartbeat still. Downstairs the kitchen looked unchanged, but now every object seemed to have meaning. The chipped mug by the sink, the small framed photograph of my parents on their wedding day, her smile polite, his eyes soft, knowing. I had always thought they looked happy. Now I saw it differently. He wasn't smiling for the camera. He was forgiving her. That evening I called my aunt, my mother's younger sister. She lived 2 towns away, the last thread of that generation. When I told her what I'd found, there was a long silence, then a sigh, deep and weary. I wondered if you'd ever know, she said. So she had known. They all had. Did he know? I asked. She hesitated. Yes, he knew. From the beginning. My throat tightened. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because, she whispered, he asked us not to. He said you were his, and that was enough. Her words slid through me like light through stained glass, fragmented, beautiful, unbearable. He had chosen to raise me, knowing I wasn't his by blood. He had lied. Not to protect himself, but to protect me. After we hung up, I walked through the house again. Each step sounded different now, as if the floor had learned a new language. The truth had rearranged the air. In her bedroom I found a small jewelry box. Inside it, a photograph, folded so many times it had almost disappeared. A younger Evelyn standing by the sea. Next to her, a man I now recognized from the letters. Samuel. His hand hovered near hers but didn't touch. Their faces caught between love and fear. I held the photo up to the light. The sun caught the edge of the paper, turning it translucent. For a brief moment their outlines blurred into one, and I felt it. Not guilt, not anger, but something quieter. Recognition. Night fell slowly, as if reluctant. I lit a candle on the table, her old habit, a single flame before bed. The light trembled, reflected in the glass of the DNA report beside it. 2 truths coexisting. Science and love. Blood and choice. I realized then that maybe both were real. Maybe we are born twice. Once through the body, once through the heart that chooses us. And though she had hidden the first truth, she'd given me the second all along. The morning after the results, I decided it had to be a mistake. Glitches happen. Databases confuse people. Science is still human, isn't it? I brewed coffee strong enough to burn through doubt. Steam rose in little ghosts that refused to vanish. I told myself stories while the cup cooled. That someone at the lab had switched samples. That Samuel Ross was an algorithmic mirage. I even convinced myself I'd clicked the wrong report. Maybe another Clara, another Whitmore, had been paired to me by accident. It sounded logical when said aloud. But logic collapses under the weight of quiet. The house was too still. Every clock tick sounded like a verdict. I opened the photo album. The thick leather one my father kept under the piano bench. Page after page of proof. His hand steadying my bicycle. His coat draped around my shoulders at the fair. His proud grin at my graduation. The evidence of love was overwhelming. I pressed a fingertip to one photograph. His arm around me. The sky behind us wide and blue. If he wasn't my father, why did my body remember his scent before his name? Why did my heartbeat still sync to his footsteps in memory? I whispered. He is my father. The air didn't disagree, but it didn't comfort either. I called the DNA company again, my voice tight with forced cheer. The woman repeated what I already knew. A 98% match to someone named Samuel Ross. She sounded certain. I thanked her as if politeness could erase precision. When the call ended, I opened the window. Cold air rushed in. Sharp, cleansing. Outside, children laughed somewhere down the street, their voices clear and innocent, untouched by data. I thought of my father reading bedtime stories. How he'd changed the endings when they were too cruel. He believed every tale deserved a little mercy. Maybe this one did too. I searched for Samuel Ross online, just to disprove the universe. Hundreds of results, professors, carpenters, veterans. But one matched the city from the report. Massachusetts. Retired librarian. 87. A smiling photograph. A small biography about preserving local history. I stared at his face. Gentle eyes. A familiar tilt of the head. Something inside me shivered. Recognition masquerading as coincidence. I closed the laptop. Hard. The sound startled the cat from the hallway. No, I said aloud. Enough. The word bounced off the walls, came back smaller. For days I lived in two realities. One where numbers lied. One where love did. I chose the first, of course. Denial feels like control. I avoided my mother's house. I avoided mirrors. I avoided sleep, because dreams have no patience for rationalizations. When exhaustion finally won, I dreamt of my father standing at the end of a pier. He looked younger, his hair untouched by grey. He held a candle cupped in both hands. The flame never flickered, though the wind howled around him. I walked toward him, but the distance stretched like tidewater. He smiled and said, "Truth is lighter than you think." Then the pier dissolved, and I woke with his voice caught between breath and belief. Morning light flooded the room. Merciless, bright. I sat up, heartbeat quick, whispering, "Truth is lighter," and realized that denial had turned heavier than grief. I decided to return to her house, not to find anything, but to silence the noise in my head. Driving there felt like moving through decades. Each street corner a chapter, each traffic light a hesitation. The key, when it met the lock, gave that familiar, reluctant twist. Inside smelled of lavender and starch, and the faint sweetness of age. The air held its breath. I told myself I was only checking on things, the pipes, the mail. But my feet carried me upward, to the attic she had always forbidden. Dust coated the steps like time's handwriting. At the top, sunlight pierced through the small round window, catching particles mid-air, tiny galaxies of what was once ours. Boxes, labeled, orderly, except one, plain brown, tied with a faded ribbon the color of forgetting. My hand hesitated above it. Denial begged for mercy one last time. But curiosity has its own kind of faith. When the ribbon fell away, the first letter breathed. My dearest Evelyn, the sea is calm tonight, but I am not. Every silence between us feels heavier than words. The ink had faded, but not enough. His name at the bottom, Samuel. My throat closed. I reached for another envelope, then another. The truth no longer waited politely at the door. It flooded the room. By the time the sun moved to the opposite window, I sat surrounded by letters. My knees ached. My palms were grey with dust and revelation. The denial was gone. In its place, a stillness that didn't ask for explanation. I folded the last letter carefully, returned it to its box. The ribbon slipped through my fingers like surrender. I whispered, "All right. I see you." Maybe to him, maybe to her, maybe to myself. The drive home was quiet. Snow began to fall. Slow, forgiving flakes that erased even the sharp edges of street signs. By the time I reached my street, I felt lighter, though my eyes were heavy. In the rearview mirror, the reflection of the falling snow looked like static. The universe correcting an old transmission. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there until the car cooled. The silence inside was different now. Not absence, preparation. I knew what I would do next. I would read them all, every letter, and when I finished, I would decide which version of the truth I could live with. The mirror on the windshield reflected the candle I had left on the kitchen table. It waited for me, unlit but ready. I smiled, small, cautious. Denial had ended. The descent had begun. I brought the box home. It sat on the kitchen table like a small, patient animal. I didn't open it right away. I need tea. I cleared the counter. I washed a single plate that didn't need washing. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick.
Tick.
The sound touched the letters as if time were blessing them. I lit the candle. The flame rose, steady, not bright. Enough to say, "I'm here." Enough to say, "Begin." I untied the ribbon. It loosened like a sigh. Inside, envelopes stacked in careful disorder. Decades shuffled into a single heartbeat. I chose the first one with a date I could bear. 1954. Paper thin as memory. Ink the color of dried cherries. My dearest Evelyn, I walked by the harbor tonight. The lanterns floated on the water like little moons pretending to be brave. I thought of your hands. I thought of the silence between us, and how even silence has a pulse when it comes from love. I stopped. Not because it hurt, because it felt true. He spoke like someone who had learned to live inside restraint, who believed tenderness could be a kind of courage. I read the next line, then the next. The cadence was simple. The way one speaks to a house after everyone else is asleep. I will not ask you to choose me. I only ask you to keep the part of me that was kind to you. If the world is unkind, let that part answer back. The kettle clicked. Water had cooled. I hadn't noticed it finish. I poured tea I didn't taste and kept reading. His mentions were small, ordinary. Bread, a poem clipped from a newspaper, the weather clawing at the window, as if the everyday could hold what the world refused. Another letter. 1955. No greeting. Only this. I stayed 2 benches away. You didn't see me. It was enough. I pressed the page to the table with a flat palm. My breath had shortened without asking permission. 2 benches away. So near he could count her eyelashes. So far the future remained impossible. I pictured the bench. Chipped green paint. Iron armrest cold from salt. I pictured my mother's scarf tied too tightly, her eyes doing their best not to search. The clock ticked louder. Or maybe my pulse had joined it. 2 rhythms learning to agree. I kept going. A winter letter. A summer one. Not every month. Not every year. But always the same temper. Devotion disciplined by mercy. In 1957 he wrote, "If I could carve a world with softer edges, I would. One where the word yours is not a door that locks." I whispered the line back to the room. It stayed in the air like steam that didn't want to disappear. I lifted my tea. It was cold. I drank it anyway. Then came 1966, the year before me. His handwriting was steadier, almost formal. I dreamt of a room with a lamp left on. No one returned to turn it off. I woke afraid, then realized fear is what we pay for keeping the lamp lit. I will keep it lit. I placed that letter face up, beside the candle. Lamp to flame, word to fire. They nodded to each other like old friends. I needed air. I opened the window a little. Night slipped in, thin and careful, as if not to disturb the paper. The curtain breathed once, twice. The house exhaled. I chose 1967. A short letter. 4 lines. I heard the news without being told. I knew it by the weather. How it rained and then didn't, like someone changed their mind mid-sky. My throat tightened. He had felt me arrive. Without my name. Without permission. He had felt me anyway. I turned the page over. Nothing on the back. Just the ghost of the words bleeding through. I pressed the paper to my chest. The fibers warmed. The past, for a moment, belonged to my body. I wanted to stop. I didn't. Denial had ended. Contact required courage. The next envelope had a different texture. Heavier. Newer. The date leapt 40 years forward. 2008. Evelyn. I am old enough to forget when the tea kettle was new, but not old enough to forget the sound your laughter made the first time it surprised you. There are days memory behaves like light. It shows only what it touches. If she ever asks, tell her I was kind. Tell her it mattered to me to be kind. Kind. He didn't ask to be named. He asked to be remembered as gentle. As if that were the inheritance he wanted to offer. I rested my forehead on the heel of my hand. The table smelled faintly of lemon oil from years of polishing. My mother's hands had done that work. Dignity disguised as routine. The candle flickered, then returned to itself. I breathed with it. In. Out. 2 flames sharing air. The next letter was addressed but never stamped. No date. Only the familiar measured script. Clara deserves the truth. Not the kind that chooses sides. The kind that holds them both, and doesn't drop either. He wrote my name. He wrote it cleanly, like a blessing. Not a question. Not a claim. A blessing. I studied the page with both hands. The paper trembled. Or I did. In the margin, a single note in my mother's handwriting. Not yet. I closed my eyes. I could see her writing those 2 words at the edge of her night. A woman trying to tame the calendar. I picked up another letter. No words. Just a small pressed flower taped to the page. Pale blue. Forget-me-not. I laughed through tears. All right, I said to the room, voice frayed. I won't. The flower lay there, stubborn in its softness. A memory no season could bully. I sorted the envelopes into errors. Early, middle, late. He never accused. He never begged. He waited, not passively, but with the discipline of someone who understands that waiting is a kind of work. In 1974, a letter written after a glimpse at the harbor. I walked beside you without walking beside you. It's astonishing how far kindness can reach when the body obeys. I felt a warmth I couldn't place, as if a small lamp had been turned on behind my ribs. The body obeys. Mine did too. I kept reading. A soft knock at the door startled me. The neighbor. She returned a pie dish I didn't remember lending. Her eyes landed on the box. Old family things? I nodded. She smiled the way people do when they smell a story but know not to ask. Sometimes the quiet ones carry the most, she said, and left the dish. When the door closed, the house took a deeper breath. It had learned to breathe in company again. I returned to the table. The pile had thinned. My shoulders had sunk lower, not from weight, but from release. The last envelope of the evening sat under the others. Not yellowed, white, crisp. My name on the front in my father's handwriting, Roberts. I didn't open it. Not yet. Contact is a path. You don't sprint at the end. I placed it beside the candle. Flame to truth. Father to daughter. I'd read it when the house was ready to hold me after it. I gathered the letters back into the box. Not as evidence now, as relics. I tied the ribbon loosely. An invitation, not a lock. I stood at the window. Snow had stopped. A pale moon hung low, generous and undecorated. On the glass, the candle made a second flame. Reflection, breathing next to reality. I touched the pane with 2 fingers. Cold. Then less cold, when my skin warmed it. 2 truths, learning how to share a surface. I slept on the sofa, the candle in a safe dish on the mantel, flame reduced to a small faithful glow. In sleep, no storms, only the steady sound of a clock with nothing left to argue about. I dreamt of a page with no words, only light pooling where ink would be. When I woke, the room looked exactly like that. Quiet, bright enough to begin again. I brewed fresh tea. I set 1 plate on the table, 1 cup. Old habits kept reaching for a second cup. For her. I let the gesture finish, then placed the cup back in the cabinet. I know, I told the cabinet gently. I know. The letter with my name waited by the candle. I sat. I inhaled once, slowly. I opened it. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means you found what we didn't say. I won't decorate it. I'll only place it in your hands the way I once placed your winter hat there when you were small. Carefully, so it wouldn't drop. I loved your mother. I also loved you. Sometimes love doesn't ask us to choose. It asks us to hold. I held both. If I failed, let me fail toward mercy. You never needed my name to be mine. You needed my presence to be yours. I hope I gave you that. Forgive the silence that carried our home. It was the quiet I could afford to keep. If you find him, tell him I thanked him for you. Tell him his kindness reached me too. With love beyond blood, Robert. I didn't cry immediately. The body understands when to keep the river behind the dam. I read the last line twice. With love beyond blood. I placed the letter beneath my palm. Warmth passed between us. Skin to paper, paper to skin. Presence travels, even when the house is empty. The candle's flame leaned toward the page as if to listen, then stood up straight again, polite, attentive. I carried the letter to the window. The morning had turned the color of cream. Neighbors brushed snow from their cars in soft rhythms. Ordinary life continued, brave as always. I thought of my father's scarf, of my mother's calendar, of a man named Samuel who never insisted on anything but kindness. Contact was complete. Not perfect. Complete. Behind me, the box waited. Not demanding. Ready. I returned the letter to the table and blew out the candle. A thin rope of smoke climbed and curled. For a second, it looked like handwriting. Then it vanished into air I now trusted. I whispered, "Thank you." To him. To them. To the flame that had held steady while I learned to. I washed the cup. I dried it. I placed it upside down, the way she always did. Then I sat with my hands folded and listened to the house. It sounded like breath, which is another way of saying it sounded alive. The next morning, light entered differently. Not from the window, from inside. It had found places to reach that darkness had forgotten. I sat at the table again, the letters beside the candle, the house calm enough to hold its breath. There was nothing left to uncover, only to understand. I opened my father's letter once more. The paper, still faintly warm from yesterday's touch, waited like a friend unwilling to leave first. I read the line that mattered most. You never needed my name to be mine. You needed my presence to be yours. That sentence rearranged the air. It dissolved every equation I had built about blood and belonging. I saw suddenly all the small kindnesses I had mistaken for habit. The way he'd warm the car before driving me to school. The way he'd leave the porch light on until I was safely home. Each gesture had been an unspoken apology for something I hadn't known he carried. Each silence had been a vow he kept on my behalf. He hadn't lied to me. He had protected the space where my childhood could exist unbroken. I whispered, "You did well, Dad." And the words came out without tremor. For hours I wandered through the house, touching the artifacts of their shared life. The porcelain figurines, the folded tablecloths, the worn prayer book. They all pulsed with a quiet endurance. When I reached the hallway mirror, I saw my reflection layered with theirs. My mother's chin, my father's gaze, something else behind it all. Maybe Samuel's patience. A whole lineage breathing through one body. I placed my hand on the glass. It was cold at first, then less so. Like they'd recognized the gesture. I wanted to know more about Samuel. Not curiosity, but completion. I searched again for the photo online. There he was. The same gentle tilt of head. The same quiet smile that carried decades of surrender. I imagined his hands writing those letters, trembling slightly not from age but restraint. He had lived a full life. No family listed. No children. Just a line in his biography, dedicated to preserving forgotten stories. A tear rolled down before I could stop it. He had been doing all along what my mother could not, remembering without speaking. That night I dreamed of them together. Not young, not old, just timeless. They sat on a bench facing the sea, hands folded in their laps. Between them, a candle burned without melting. When I approached, my father was there too, standing behind them, watching the same horizon. He smiled, nodded once, then turned toward me. "Tell her it's all right," he said. And then the dream dissolved into light so gentle it woke me without pain. When I opened my eyes, dawn was thin and pink at the edges. I walked to the window. The world looked washed clean, as if the night had decided to start over. I made coffee and sat near the candle. The flame flickered even before I lit it, catching the first sunlight as though it remembered how. I spoke aloud, voice low but clear. "You're all forgiven." The words felt too small for what they carried, but the air accepted them anyway. I added softly, "And I'm forgiven too." Later that day, I called my aunt again. Her voice, aged and kind, arrived wrapped in static. "Aunt June," I said, "did Mom ever tell you why she didn't say anything?" A sigh traveled across the distance. "She was afraid you'd think less of her. But mostly she wanted you to have one father, not two half-truths." "She loved him?" She never stopped. "And he knew?" "Yes. Robert knew from the start. He said, 'If I love her, I must love everything she brings, even silence.'" The phone went quiet for a while. Then June said something so gentle I barely caught it. "You see, dear, your father's greatest act of love was pretending he didn't know." After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen, the phone still warm against my ear. Pretending he didn't know. How many years had he carried that grace, invisible but alive in every small kindness? I thought about the word father. How it had always felt like a noun, when maybe it was a verb. A continual act of staying, protecting, holding. He had fathered me every day, even when the truth could have broken him. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me still enough for gratitude to surface. That evening, I invited my daughter again. We ate soup in silence, the kind of silence that listens. She asked, "Are you all right now?" I smiled. All right is too small, but I'm peaceful. She looked at the candle between us. Was it worth it? Knowing? Yes, I said, because truth didn't ruin us. It gave her peace. Her eyes softened, reflecting the flame. Then it gave you peace too. Maybe that's the same thing, I said. After she left, I stayed at the table, watching the wax form its quiet lake. The flame leaned toward the photo of my parents, their faces now illuminated equally. No guilt, no pretense. Just light. I whispered. You both did your best. And somewhere inside that sentence, the tension of 5 decades unclenched. I found myself opening the final unsent letter from my mother, dated only months before she passed. Her handwriting was delicate, her ink faint, but her words still held breath. My sweet Clara. If you ever find this, know that the silence was never meant to hurt you. It was my way of loving you safely. Some truths are like glass. They can show you everything, but they can also cut. If I could rewrite our story, I wouldn't remove the secret. I would only hold it differently, gentler, less afraid. Tell your father thank you. Tell him I know what love is because of him. And if you ever meet Samuel, tell him I carried his kindness all my life, and it never grew old. Love. Always. Mom. The room blurred. Not from tears. From too much seeing at once. 3 hearts had written one story, each line bending toward mercy. I pressed the letter against my chest and closed my eyes. The heartbeat beneath it matched the rhythm of the clock. Life, keeping time with forgiveness. That night I dreamed again. My parents dancing slowly in the living room, the record player spinning without sound. The candle burned nearby, its flame perfectly still. When I woke, dawn was already painting gold on the floorboards. I realized I hadn't felt loneliness once in that dream, only continuity. I dressed, made tea and sat beside the candle. Its flame moved as I breathed, no longer a stranger's breath but my own. If this moment reached you, let it echo. Like the video. Not for the story, but for the truth inside it. I spent the day cleaning, humming, remembering without ache. The box of letters stayed on the table. Open now, not hidden. Each envelope a doorway no longer dangerous to walk through. When night came, I lit the candle again, though I didn't need to. Habit had turned into ritual. Ritual had turned into prayer. Prayer had turned into light. The flame bent toward me, and I understood. I wasn't keeping vigil for the dead. I was keeping company with the living. The next part would not be words. It would be act. A gesture that turns knowing into being. Tomorrow I would take the letters to the old church. I would read their names aloud. And for the first time in 50 years, the truth would stand in daylight. Not his confession, but his love returned to its natural shape. Morning opened like a page turned gently. The world outside had thawed into brightness. Puddles catching sky, branches trembling with their own reflections. I knew what the day was for. I placed the letters in a linen pouch, wrapped the ribbon around twice, not to hide them, but to hold them steady. The candle went into my coat pocket, still smelling faintly of lavender and wax. When I stepped outside, Air met me with that rare mixture of chill and permission. The church stood at the edge of town, a modest shape of stone and mercy. Its bell hadn't rung in years, yet its silence sounded faithful. Inside, light dripped through colored glass, landing in soft patches of gold across the pews. I sat near the front and unpacked the pouch. The letters waited, alive in their stillness. I didn't read them aloud. I just spoke their names. Evelyn. Robert. Samuel. 3 syllables of history. 3 variations of love. The air seemed to listen. Dust swirled upward, small galaxies turning inside a beam of sun. I lit the candle and placed it on the altar rail. Its flame leaned toward the stained glass, meeting the light halfway. Together they formed a color I had no word for, something between forgiveness and flame. For years, I'd believed forgiveness was a decision. Today it felt like physics, the inevitable settling of what was always meant to rest. I whispered, "You can stop guarding me now." The flame fluttered once, like a sigh of relief. I stayed there until the wax began to spill over, forming new shapes along the holder. When I finally stood, my knees ached, but lightly, like they remembered being useful again. Outside, the sky had turned the pale blue of healed skin. On the walk home, I realized I was humming. A tune without words. My mother used to hum when she cooked. My father used to whistle the same melody when fixing the fence. I never knew they shared a song. Maybe they didn't. Maybe I'm the one who finally joined their notes. At home, I set the candle back on the table. It had burned down halfway. The wax lake inside shimmered, golden, patient. I traced its rim with my fingertip, letting the warmth mark me faintly. In that moment, I saw every version of them. The young lovers who once wrote letters by lamplight. The middle-aged couple tending to a house that kept its secrets. The old souls who left quietly, each believing they'd done wrong. They hadn't. They'd only done human. And human, I was learning, is holy enough. That afternoon my daughter arrived again. She carried fresh bread, the kind that smells like generosity. We ate in the kitchen, sunlight laying itself across the table like a blessing. "Did you go?" she asked. I nodded. She tore a piece of bread and dipped it in honey. "Grandma would have liked that." "She would," I said. She liked anything that stayed warm longer than expected. We laughed softly. It wasn't the laughter of forgetting. It was the laughter of continuing. Later, as she helped me tidy, she found one letter I'd left open. "Can I read it?" "Of course." She sat, eyes moving slowly across the page. When she finished, she exhaled. "Mom, they all loved each other, didn't they? Just differently." I nodded. "Yes. Differently but completely." She smiled. "Maybe that's the real inheritance." Her words landed with the gentle finality of truth. Not dramatic, just true. After she left, I walked through each room of the house, touching walls, window frames, the edges of picture frames. Everywhere my hands went, something in me whispered thanks. In the bedroom, I found the old jewelry box again. Inside, a single earring, its twin long lost. I remembered asking once if she'd ever found the other. She'd said, maybe it found something better to belong to. Now I understood. Some things are meant to remain half-paired, not broken, just balanced elsewhere. I placed the earring on the table beside the candle. Another small truth reunited with light. When night came, I opened the window wide. The air carried the smell of wet earth, new growth. I could almost hear the sea, though it was miles away. I lit the candle again. Flame rose in a single breath, tall and unafraid. I whispered their names once more, but this time they sounded like blessings, not ghosts. Evelyn. Robert. Samuel. Each name released a weight. Each weight turned to warmth. I let the silence after it stretch, long enough for gratitude to walk through. Forgiveness doesn't announce itself. It drifts in through the smallest doorway. A memory that no longer stings. A photograph that looks softer than before. It asks nothing. It simply arrives when the story is ready to end kindly. Tonight, that story ended kindly. I could feel them. Not his presences, but his calm, the kind that stays after a storm leaves, when the air still smells of rain, yet the sky is already clearing. I leaned back, eyes half closed, and said quietly, "Thank you for the life that came from your mistakes." The candle tilted once, almost playfully. Then it steadied, proud of its own endurance. I thought about writing to Samuel again, even if he'd never answer. Then I realized I already had. Every moment of my understanding had been a letter sent through the invisible post of the heart. I touched the pouch of letters and felt its temperature, warm, as if memory itself had body heat. I smiled. Not everything that ends must cool. Before bed, I stepped outside one last time. The moon hung low, brushed with clouds. The world smelled of thawing snow and new beginnings. I whispered a small prayer, the simplest I knew. May love remember itself through us. The wind answered by passing softly through the trees, and for once I didn't try to name the sound. I just listened. Inside, the candle still burned. Its wax had formed tiny islands of light, each holding its own reflection. I knew what tomorrow would bring. The ritual, the act that would seal this forgiveness into the fabric of the world. But tonight was for resting inside it, for letting peace rehearse its permanence. I placed the candle in the window, where its flame met its twin in the glass, two lights breathing as one. The house finally had learned how to exhale. Morning came quietly, without insistence. No birds, no bells, just the soft crackle of thawing frost outside the window. The candle had burned low through the night. Its wick, curved like a question mark, leaned toward the first light of day. I knew what the morning was asking for. It wasn't more words. It was gesture. The language my parents had always trusted more than speech. I gathered what I needed. The pouch of letters, the small glass bowl that had belonged to my mother, and the matches my father used to light every Christmas candle. Each object was ordinary. Together they felt ceremonial. I walked to the garden behind the house. The earth was damp but ready, the air still trembling with the scent of snow retreating. A robin hopped near the fence, unafraid. The world, it seemed, wanted to witness. I set the bowl on a stone. Its rim caught the morning light, a ring of gold around emptiness. Inside, I placed one letter from each. One from her, one from him, one from Samuel. 3 voices, 3 versions of love. Then I lit the match. The flame rose small at first, curious. It hesitated as if asking permission. Then it grew, gentle, sure, purposeful. The paper curled, edges folding in like closing petals. Smoke spiraled upward, pale grey turning to white. It smelled faintly of lavender and salt. Her perfume and the sea they once shared. I didn't cry. I watched. I breathed. As the flame consumed the words, I whispered, "Nothing you wrote was wasted. Every word has already become light." The wind carried the smoke toward the trees, each wisp lifting pieces of memory higher, until they disappeared into morning. When the last ember dimmed, I touched the ashes with my fingertips. They were warm, almost alive. I scattered them into the garden soil, mixing them gently with the damp earth. Not burying, returning. "Grow here," I said. "Grow into something that remembers, without pain." The robin chirped once, approvingly. It hopped closer to where the ashes lay, pecking lightly, as if blessing the ground with movement. I stayed outside a long while. The clouds thinned, the sky turned the color of forgiveness, that in-between shade where grey still lingers but doesn't win. I thought about how my parents had always gardened together. How each spring, my father would turn the soil, and my mother would hum as she planted. Now I understood. Gardening had been their ritual too. They'd buried what hurt, and from it, beauty had grown. I returned to the house. The scent of smoke followed me, soft and earthy. I opened the windows. Fresh air rushed in, sweeping through the rooms like absolution. On the table, I placed the empty bowl. The inside gleamed, faint traces of ash forming a pattern that looked almost like wings. I didn't clean it. Some things deserve to stay marked by what they've released. In the afternoon I lit the candle again, the same one that had witnessed everything. Its flame reflected in the glass bowl, two fires greeting each other across memory and matter. For the first time, I realized the candle wasn't about remembrance anymore. It was about continuation. I whispered, "You're part of the same light now." As the day faded, I sat by the window, watching the sky soften into its evening colors. Gold into rose, rose into gray, gray into that particular kind of blue that only exists when the world forgives itself for surviving. I closed my eyes. Inside my chest, I could feel them. Not as ghosts, but as warmth. As if love, once set free, had nowhere else to go but home. When darkness settled fully, I carried the candle outside. The flame glowed steady against the wind. I placed it on the stone where the bowl had been. A single point of light surrounded by night. Small, yes, but unafraid. I whispered the words that rose without thinking. "Everything you couldn't finish, I will live kindly." The flame flickered once, then it steadied, proud of what it understood. I stayed until the wax thinned and the wick bent low. Then I covered the flame with my hand, not to extinguish it, to thank it. The smoke curled up, delicate and silver, twisting once before disappearing into the dark that now felt almost holy. Inside, the house waited. Quiet, balanced, whole. The air smelled of warmth and clean endings. I placed the candle back on the mantel. Beside it, I set 3 small stones I'd gathered from the garden, one for each of them. Earth, air, fire, light. 4 elements, 4 witnesses, 1 story at peace. Before bed, I wrote a single line in my journal. Forgiveness is not the closing of a door. It's the quiet decision to leave the light on. Then I blew gently across the ink, watching it dry in the dim glow of the lamp. Outside, the wind shifted east, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and spring. I smiled. Tomorrow would bring no grand revelations, no new ghosts. Only morning, steady and honest, and that would be enough. Spring arrived gently, without announcement. The trees outside my window no longer looked skeletal. Tiny leaves shimmered at their tips, the quiet evidence that endings are never final, only folded. Every morning, I wake before the sun. I light a small candle on the kitchen table, not for remembrance anymore, for rhythm. The house joins me. It has learned to breathe again. Each window exhales with the dawn. Each floorboard hums when I walk. Even silence feels companionable now, not empty. Sometimes I still catch myself waiting for my mother's voice, her gentle correction of a recipe, her laughter tucked behind disapproval. Sometimes I think I hear my father's keys at the door, the sound that used to mean you're safe now. But when I turn, it's just light moving across the wall. And that's enough, because I've learned that light, too, is a form of return. The garden has changed since the ritual. Where I mix their ashes with the soil, green shoots have begun to appear, small, uncertain, brave. When it rains, they bend. When it clears, they lift their faces again. I water them without naming them. Not flowers, not memories, just continuations. Yesterday a robin landed near the same stone where the bowl once stood. It pecked the ground, tilted its head, and sang 3 notes that sounded suspiciously like laughter. I laughed back. Some languages don't require translation. Inside, the bowl remains on the table. I never polished it. The ash marks have faded into faint silver, like constellations deciding to stay put. When the morning light hits it, the surface shines as if it still remembers fire. Sometimes I trace the rim with my fingers, and the warmth returns even on cold days. It feels like they're all still here. Not haunting, just hovering in kindness. People talk about closure as if it's a door that clicks shut. I don't believe in that. Closure to me is a window that opens quietly at night, and for the first time, you're not afraid of what the air might bring in. That's what this story became. An open window. A breeze that smells of old paper, wax, and new beginnings. I used to think family was about sameness. Faces that mirror each other, histories that align neatly like photographs in an album. Now I know it's about continuity of love, about the courage to hold contradictions without breaking. My mother loved a man she could not keep. My father loved a truth he could not tell. And I learned to love them both in the language they left behind. Silence made sacred. Sometimes I wonder what Samuel thought when he received my letter. Maybe he read it and smiled. Maybe he placed it in a drawer beside her photograph. Maybe he whispered her name one last time before sleep. Or maybe he never received it at all. Maybe love works faster than the post, traveling through thought instead of distance. Either way, I like to think he knew. That kindness didn't vanish with secrecy. It simply changed addresses. Every night before I go to bed, I light the same candle, the one that's been burning through every part of this story. Its wax is nearly gone now, but the flame remains unbothered by its own impermanence. I sit beside it, eyes half closed, and whisper a line I wrote for them in my journal. You did not fail me. You gave me the map to forgiveness, drawn in silence and light. The words rest in the air, and I imagine them traveling, through rooms, through years, through hearts that once trembled. And then, I imagine them returning. If grief is a house, mine has finally found its windows open. Air moves through it easily. The rooms smell of cinnamon again. I bake, I hum, I water the plants. Simple rituals that no longer hide the sacred. They are the sacred. I used to chase peace like it was a person I needed to meet. Now it lives here. It folds the towels with me. It sits quietly at breakfast. It leaves the light on when I forget. A few nights ago, my daughter called just to say she missed the sound of the candle in the background of our talks. She said it made her feel safe, even through the phone. I smiled. Then the light is doing its job, I told her. She paused. Mom, do you think Grandma and Grandpa hear you when you talk to them? I looked at the flame, steady, gold, certain. I think they are the silence that answers. The robin still visits each morning. It hops along the fence, pauses on the same post near the garden, and looks directly toward the window where I sit. Some days I wave, some days I whisper. I know. It flutters its wings and disappears into the sky. It always returns. If you were to stand outside my window tonight, you'd see a single candle burning, its light pressed against glass, its reflection floating beside it. 2 flames, 1 origin. You might think it's just a candle, but it's more than that. It's every unspoken word finally given shape. It's memory learning to stay warm without burning. It's proof that love, once it becomes light, never asks to be seen. It simply illuminates what remains. If you stayed until now, thank you. You're part of a circle of souls who still believe love outlives time. subscribe, and walk with me to the next story. The candle flickers as if in response. Then studies. I whisper one last time. Everything we keep in silence eventually learns how to speak. And the house, so quiet for so many years, finally exhales. There are mornings when I wake before the world remembers itself, the air still half asleep, the birds not yet sure of their voices. Those are the hours when memory feels closest, not as thought, but as breath. Sometimes I speak to them then, not aloud, just quietly, inside the hum of the kettle, or the rustle of curtains. I tell them the garden is growing, that the robin still returns, that the light has found its way into every corner of the house. And I tell them something else, that I'm no longer afraid of what silence holds. Because silence, I've learned, is not emptiness. It's the space where truth comes to rest. There are nights, too, when I walk through the rooms in darkness, fingertips grazing the walls like reading braille written by time. Each step feels like a verse in a prayer I didn't know I was saying. Sometimes I think about the flame that once burned for them, how it needed air to live, how it always leaned toward movement. And I understand now. We are all made of that same insistence. Light learning to stay. If love leaves anything behind, it isn't proof. It's presence. The warmth that lingers after the hands have gone. The soft glow that refuses to fade even when the wick is gone. I no longer wait for answers. I live among echoes. Some are laughter. Some are memory. All of them are home. And when the last candle finally sighs into darkness, I know the light won't end. It will only change rooms.